got to change the Republican Party back to the path that it was once on. The Republican Party was once a party of humble foreign policy and freedom and trade and lower taxes, but we've definitely seen a shift in that. This debt has been left to the next generation, and we have to remedy that so that the next generation following ours has a strong economy to fall back on. One issue that I'm very, very concerned about is education. I am an assistant principal at a high school in Texas. I've taught United States history, imagine that. I have worked in the public school system, and I've taught 7th, 8th, 10th, and 11th grade. Now I'm a 9th grade assistant principal. So I have seen our education system and the problems that it faces. And my grandfather's message about education is very simple. The federal government needs to get out. The idea that the federal government owns our children is a silly notion. It was not the idea of the founding fathers for the federal government to own our children and to have federally mandated curriculum. We have to understand that the federal government has no authority based on the United States Constitution to control schools or to control curriculum. What we must do is abolish the Department of Education. And people out there in America today are going, oh my goodness, to abolish the Department of Education, that is an absolutely ludicrous idea. It wasn't so ludicrous as recently as Bob Dole's campaign to run for president. It was not a ludicrous and silly idea when Ronald Reagan ran for president in 1980. The entire concept of the Department of Education is a very new one, in fact. The United States did very well from 1789 until 1979 without a federal department for education. We must abolish the Department of Education. It is unconstitutional, and more than unconstitutional, but more than that, it's un-Republican. The decisions about education need to be left to the states. The decisions about education need to be left to local communities. But more importantly than that, they need to be left up to parents. Because no one knows how to educate their children better than the parents of those children. So we have to have the ability for parents to homeschool their children, send their children to private schools, and gain the education that they need to be competitive in the 21st century. We see standardized test scores taking hold of our school system, and the only thing that matters is to do well on tax and be exemplary. Teachers' jobs hinge upon the scores of these students. That has to change. We have to get the federal government out. We have to get the federal government and these ideas of no child left behind out of our school systems, because the people in Texas know better how to educate the children of Texas than those in Washington, D.C. Idea that I was speaking with two gentlemen before this meeting is healthcare. Young man was telling me that he's here at Lamar University to study to become a doctor. I think that's a wonderful thing. We need great doctors in America. And there are many doctors in my family, including my grandfather, but also my aunt, who came to school here at Lamar University before she went on to become an OB/GYN. Healthcare is also something that we need to start paying attention to. And quite simply, we need to get the Food and Drug Administration out of our lives, out of the government, and we need to get this tie that they have with the pharmaceutical companies. Amen. Because the prices of drugs and the prices of medical care are rising. And if we're not careful, we're going to be entrenched in Hillary care. And that's going to be a socialized form of government where of medicine, where you don't get to pick your doctor, and you don't get to pick the services that you need or want. So we have to be careful. We have to place the medical and healthcare systems back into the free and open market so that people can make decisions for themselves. My brother just got back from California. He had an acoustic neuroma on the audio nerve in his ear. And he had a surgery there in California. And the reason that he went to California is because that's where the best surgeon in the nation is. I fear that under a socialized healthcare system, we won't have that opportunity. We won't have that right to be able to get on an airplane and fly to California to see the best surgeon. They're going to say, no, I'm sorry, you are limited to these doctors in these places, and the cost is going to go up. So healthcare is certainly something that we need to pay attention to. Socialized healthcare limits our treatment options, and Americans are beginning to go elsewhere for healthcare. It's very scary when we see that American citizens are flying to India for heart care. We have to return the American healthcare system to the top place that it has had in our world for the last 100 years. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose that. My grandfather has spoken out very strongly about healthcare. He has said that all medical expenses businesses need to be tax deductible. He has said that we need to eliminate federal regulations regarding businesses covering their employees. The last thing that we need to do is tell businesses how they can and cannot cover their employees with health care insurance. We must remove the federal regulations to make the United States health care the envy of the world once again. The answer is not socialized medicine. The answer is to return health care to an open and free market. Another message that Ron Paul has spoken about for 30 years is life and liberty. And this is the concept that the right to life is at the center of the American ideal of liberty. If we don't cherish life, then we don't have much to stand upon at all. He is a pro-life OBGYN who has delivered more than 4,000 babies and never once performed an abortion. He has stood firmly against this idea and against this concept of abortion. He says that life begins at conception, but it should not be a federal matter. All issues of life, violence, crime, and murder should be dealt with at the local level. This is not a topic or a subject where the United States Supreme Court should get involved with decisions like Roe versus Wade. We need to return the idea of federalism back to the states and allow each state to make the determination for their citizens what their decision is going to be. And while he personally stands as extremely pro-life, it is important that he remains consistent and has for over 30 years on this pro-life issue. And that's simply that we need to return it to the state level. And you begin to hear more and more Republican candidates say that. So again, this has been a success. For 30 years now, since the mid-1970s, my grandfather has been an elected official, and I have really known no other life than the grandson of the United States Congressman. It is my honor to be a part of the Ron Paul family, and I see things that are written about him along the lines of the fact that he is a 20th century or 21st century Thomas Jefferson. And that often makes me stop and reflect and count my blessings to know that my grandfather has so consistently and so firmly held these beliefs for such a long period of time. But in these 30 years, he talked about privacy and personal liberty, and the fact that the biggest threat to our privacy is government. And we've seen this more so in the last 2 terms since the year 2000 than ever before. We must limit government's ability to collect data on our citizens. Amen. We have to be careful when they take acts passed by the federal legislature and they call it a Patriot Act. And that insinuates that if you don't believe what the Patriot Act stands for, you're not a patriot. Well, I say that's silly. I am a patriot, and I believe that the United States government ought to get out of our lives. With the passage of the Patriot Act, we have seen that the government has enabled itself to look at our bank accounts, to look at our email accounts, to look at our telephone calls, and they've done this under the disguise of the Patriot Act and the war on terror. This is scary and it must be stopped. We also must stop this movement towards a national ID card. This also is a big threat to our personal liberty and our privacy, in the sense that they're going to give it to us again under the disguise of fixing the immigration problem. That every immigrant needs to have a national ID card. It starts with an immigrant, but then you have to give these ID cards to everyone that may look like an immigrant or sound like an immigrant. And after this, we see that all 50 states are beginning to change the regulations for driver's licenses. This is a national ID card, folks. Just because it says Texas on it doesn't make it okay. This is a national ID card. Be careful. Don't let them sell these ideas to you as a way to fix immigration. This is a way to strip and take your privacy. So be careful and understand that the ID card movement is alive and well, and we need to protect ourselves against it. We also must protect our medical privacy. Insurance companies and other entities have access to more personal information regarding our medical records than ever before. We must protect the rights of citizens to protect their private medical records. We also need financial privacy.